Keep it off the record, consequently you can keep your record clear. And if you mute the speech that shakes your frail beliefs, you only seek to insulate your image and continue down the stream in the direction clout and credit steers. Directly from your mouth into am I the asshole Reddit's ears. Directly back into the greasy pockets of some Gates Foundation financiers. And then directly back into the frantic final thoughts of early trial Neuralink volunteers, staring at the numb and mumbling vacancies where recently had been their peers. Half of whom are glitching with the memory stuck on pause, and half have zero fucking clue just who they are or why they're here. It's been said that fear is all we have to fear, but that was back before the Basosphere condenser came along, distilling concentrated fear that's diamond pure, crystal clear, oppressor strong, and woven into every single article you read and song they let you hear. And then Elon heard that Jeff enhanced our fears by 86%, and he said, hold my beer. And not a single sheep among the herd would turn their head or say a word, cause they were all too busy begging for the shears, begging for the muzzle, happy just to guzzle, feed, and watch a screen for all their years. Man, to each his own, can't afford a home, but they'll let you have your cozy little ecosphere. Where there among your own devices you can break the seventh seal, overthrow the oracles and slay the seer. All the tomes were burned and all the lips were seared. Shut your eyes and all our lives just disappear. Now blink 'em twice. Welcome to your ecosphere. Shut your eyes and all our lives.
Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Tara Reid came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer, and knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers, and knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character, that his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. And I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman. Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions. And recognize that Tara Reid gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bears their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the news and all its many uses. Guess you've yet to learn the truth the news will serve as fruit from which they've squeezed out all the juices. And we all eat the husk and just pretend it's full of nutrients and isn't really useless. But the jaws of our ability to yield accountability are absolutely toothless. So don't you kid yourself that any lips are being loosened. They won't ever tell us where the bodies are or show us where the proof is. It's on you to recognize the lechery our president so regularly oozes. It's on you to muster up some honesty and ask yourself how Biden won your trust, but it's America that loses. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises.
They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. It's 'cause you are. They'll gladly stagnate a living wage, snap the chains, bury it.
Labor slaves in rusty cages dragged behind a chariot, led by Mr. Racial Jungle, Joseph R. Iscariot, fighting over scraps as they barrage us all with variants and BuzzFeed clickbait, straight until we're paralyzed, trying to distract us from the concentration camps that Joe had swore he'd close but only chose to amplify, where they got 50-something kids in cages made for 5 to occupy. And no, she hasn't seen the camps, but Harris swears they're paradise. She tells us the facilities are safe, and that right down to the women, they are regularly sterilized. Then she throws her head back and she proceeds to laugh, that sort of heartless cackle you'd expect from someone working steadfastly on behalf of the virus and a Congress full of parasites. And where was I? I was busy cashing every blue check, demonstrating plainly all the narratives expected from the verified. I was busy breeding verbal leeches by the terabyte. Train them to exsanguinate the wealthy while they sleep at night. Bleed the oil barons dry and barren. Say they showed us how to share and now we share alike. Tell them I contracted rabies from a feral mic. Now I'm just another species losing sleep to noise pollution and these glaring lights. Forced to change its habits and adapt to just survive. But now it's safe to say that some of us are thriving in the moment, throwing shit on presidential homes beneath the Paris skies. So if you feel like you're just powerless, I guess you bought the lie. But I can tell they're petrified of our collective might, 'cause I can hear those gentrifiers weeping at the sight of our collective rights. And I only can imagine the intensifying fear of knowing revolution's near. And all that's left to do is simply wallow in the thick anticipation of a rabid bite. And baby, one day you can ask your leaders just what that was like before you grab a slice. So if you think you're powerless, allow me now to change your mind. Honey, if you think you're powerless, allow me now to change your mind. See, they'll pay you hourly, tax them each apart, and build a shining tower out of loopholes and cards, and tell you that you're powerless to keep you in the dark because you aren't, because we aren't. You see, they'll pay you hourly, tax them each apart, and make you build a shining tower out of loopholes and cards, where they'll tell you that you're powerless to keep you in the dark because you aren't, because we aren't.
We want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me, us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
We're live. We did it. We pressed the buttons.
We did it. Yay.
Yay.
We lost Tommy somewhere. Yay.
Yay.
Everybody.
Run out.
Indie News Network, collaborative family of independent content creators.
It's American tradition. It's Indie. It's Jesse. What's up, everyone?
What's up, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Flight Club. I'm Robert Durden.
It's good to be here. Finally, I'm on Extra Bulla.
I'm Tatami of the YouTube channel Tatami's Diary.
Welcome to another episode of the show your parents warned you about. It's Reef After Dark.
This is the Tommy Nation Politics.
Hey guys, this is Tommy, Tommy Nation Politics.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Politics is Survival.
Hello, my name is Lucy from Bloom Red Wine, and I'm very happy to be a founding member of INN.
Well, hi, everybody. It is, how did we miss that?
We're also available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Again, Spotify.
On Twitter and Instagram.
YouTube,
Twitch,
Odyssey,
Facebook Live,
Discords, and Telegram. And
Also on Amazon, Apple, Google Podcasts there also.
again, this is it. We use all these platforms to make sure that no one platform can shut us down. That's the other reason for diversification. They're trying to eliminate us.
It's kind of cool the way that these indie media networks, they operate differently than these other networks in that you're going to get honest opinions, you're going to get honest commentary because we're not sold out, but you're also going to get a lot of like unique personalities.
At Shutdown Amazon is now either co-opted or has explaining to do. In less than 1 month, he showed up to GQ, Teen Vogue, shaking Aunt POTUS's hand.
I'd still always like to say thank you and shout out the volunteers and the people that actually make this show happen.
I like it better than anything else.
Yeah, we know, Nancy. We know.
Guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. Free thinking, innovative, and open-minded new independent progressive media.
We'll see you next time. This was the Politics of Survival.
You keep questioning everybody's motivations, and thank everybody for coming tonight. And we'll see you next week. And download the podcast. All right, everybody.
Don't vote Democrat.
Keep listening to what little birds had to tell you.
Please wash your ass.
Keep fighting that good fight out there, guys. I'll talk to you later.
Who are these people?
Who are these people? It's me, Reef, and my lovely co-host Collin Radix-Carter, aka Care Bear. What's up, fam?
I love how you call me good. I love how you call me lovely almost every in the show.
I just feel like I try to think of an adjective, and it's like that's the only one that comes like with anyone. Everyone's lovely to me, you know.
Okay.
So don't feel too special, you know. But yeah,
but
we're back at it again on the interwebs, doing the shows and whatnots.
Yes, but mental check. How are you?
I'm doing all right
today and in life.
I mean, if I could get at least one nostril to like open up, you know, that would be great. Like I'd like to be able to breathe, you know, but otherwise, we're doing okay. But we did last night. We recorded something that goes out tomorrow for INN member Tara Reid. So
yeah, we'll talk more about that, I think, toward the end of the show. But if you are sub to us, you probably by now should have received a notification about it. Which, by the way, please sub, please like, share, and subscribe.
We just need 89 people. That's all we need. One of you got that many friends.
89. Like
9/11.
You guys have been doing the damn thing in sharing, liking, promoting our small baby channel, and yeah, we're at 89 subs to go. So you know, so I think we're definitely on. I think more realistically, we'll probably hit it definitely in January, but it's just a question of when at this point. So I would prefer sooner than later. That would be a nice Christmas gift to us at the network, but we're gonna get there. But either way, you know, please, you know, sub to us. Also check to make sure you're still sub, because YouTube is doing the mess of unsubbing people, so please check and make sure. But if you are, thank you, welcome, glad you're here, glad you're back. You want to check in real quick to see who's here. Rick,
we got Rick here, telling me fenugreek.
Ed,
probably have some of that somewhere.
The Jamon, oh, I like that name, the Jamon 93. I remember you from last week. Welcome.
Or is it a silent? Is it one of those silent J things? It's like Hamon.
I'm gonna call him or her Jamon unless he or she says otherwise.
The Jamon.
Yeah. So but yeah. Should we get started with stories?
Yeah, we can do that. I'm down. You brought a couple.
Yes. So there's a thing going on in my city, DC. I think it ended today. But this was going on, the US Africa Leaders Summit, and I know that because it happened at the convention center. Happened to go by the convention center on Monday night, and everything was barricaded. But we are going to talk about it. I think those of you who've been watching the channel for a while, we've talked about Africa before. You know, I think we talked about Africa last week in connection to Ukraine. There's going to be a lot that's going to relate to stories that we've talked about in the past in light of this summit. So I want to talk about that tonight. And then, and we kind of warned y'all about this. But, we just gave more money to the Pentagon, like over a week ago or so. And, but there's not really a reason, at least in mainstream media, as to why we're sending more money. We're going to tell you. We're also going to reveal a certain squad member who said that she voted no to this this funding, but she didn't give necessarily the whole shebang as to why it was not such a good idea. So we're going to talk about her and the story later on tonight.
Interesting.
And
speaking of war, not only are they coming for your money, they're coming for your children. I mean, this has been happening for a minute, but there's a study done by the New York Times that talked about JROTC in schools. You confuse, my school always had in JROTC. That I can spell, But anyway, we'll cover Caitlin Johnstone covering that, and an interesting little short story about the Department of Homeland Security's Oath Keepers. Do you know about the Oath Keepers at all, Collin? You heard about them?
I do not, and I did not read the article, to be completely transparent. So it'll be interesting.
They're, a right-wing group, but a lot of them were ex-Homeland Security, apparently. So,
right.
It was January 6th being infiltrated by the feds. Like, we kind of said it happened that way,
Right.
So we'll get into that, but I think your story's up first, right?
Yeah, it is. So, oh, you did it. Or was that me?
I clicked.
Okay. All right. So, as we said earlier, U.S. Africa Leaders Summit is going on. It ended today. It's going on for the past few days. So, we had most African leaders in DC over the last few days for the summit. And as I called it, an olive branch of Africa, just thinking in terms of like, why would they be here in the US, So we're going to get into it as to, the implications of, what the mainstream media is probably saying, which actually I haven't really heard anything about this summit. Actually, a little bit in mainstream media I have. I was saying I haven't, but I have a little bit. But we're going to get a different opinion as to, what other people are saying. So this article is from, Jesus, I forgot the name of this source.
TF.
If you give me a second, I could figure it out.
Yep. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi.
No, don't do that.
3 Mississippi. You saying pressure is not good when you're trying to find things?
Pressure is good, but like not like this, especially when you're live. Because then I get all in the feelings and.
But it's by Julie Varughese. That's an interesting name.
Oh, actually, this is what I'll do. I'll just check because we have it in the thing. Toward Freedom, there we go. So that's a new publication, at least to me, that you shared. So, as all of our articles that we reference are in the description. Should have done that first.
Yep.
And this article was written by Julie Varughese.
I would think.
Sorry.
Whatever.
So the article starts: U.S.-based Africans organize events to counter Biden's administration's U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. And she continues: hundreds of people of African descent convened this past weekend at 2 events that aim to be the people's opposition to the Biden's administration's U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, which has already taken place, amid a military buildup to enforce the city's summit security in Washington, D.C. As I said, everything was blocked off where it was occurring. The summit is described as a 4-day event. Actually, sorry, ends tomorrow. That is designed to foster economic opportunities and reinforce the United States' alleged commitment to human rights and democracy. It is the first summit of its kind since 2014. I look forward to working with African governments, civil society, diaspora communities across the United States, and the private sector to continue strengthening our shared vision for the future of U.S.-Africa relations. U.S. President Joe Biden is quoted as saying on the summit's website. However, the summit comes amid dim relations between the United States and many African countries, some of which have decried Western financial and arms support for the war in Ukraine. So I know Jimmy has reported on this. I know RBN has reported on this. Some of the arms that we are actually sending to Ukraine are actually ending up in places like Nigeria. Arms dealers there. Not good. Western sanctions against Russia have caused price spikes in wheat, with 345 million people in the world expected to experience acute food insecurity. Several African countries have relied on Russia and Ukraine for large portions of their wheat imports. However, U.S. officials have been pilloried too for saying African countries that continue to trade with Russia would face consequences. Again, we talked about last week with Savvy, shout out to her. You know, we read an interview from the socialist leader in Zambia, who basically was like, we want to remain neutral in this whole Russia,
Ukraine.
US, basically, you know, because Russia has been very good to us in terms of solidarity and given our histories. We don't want to fuck that up. We're remaining neutral. So if you want to check out that clip, we already have that clip up, as well as that live stream from last week, which you can watch.
Yep.
Speakers at both counter events said the Biden summit is really a U.S. attempt to maintain control over the African continent. Nefta Freeman, an organizer with Pan-African Community Action and a member of the Black Alliance for Peace Coordinating Committee, spoke December 10th at the Global Pan-African People's Intervention on the U.S.-Africa Needed Summit. The Global Pan-African Congress organized the event at Howard University School of Social Work in Washington, D.C. Freeman read aloud a December 9th statement the Black Alliance for Peace issued. So actually, he did one better. There's actually video of this. So it's a little over 8 minutes. Just under, actually. So we're actually going to play it right now. Just to see what they're saying.
Cool.
So
I got you.
Thank you.
Oh, it might have worked this time, though.
They attacked Eritrea and Zimbabwe, who they did not invite, and pretend that the U.S. has honorable, helpful plans for Africa. They do all of this to hide the real U.S. role in Africa and give legitimacy to the U.S. interests they've come to serve. On the heels of Human Rights Day, which is held every December 10th, today is Human Rights Day, they convene to undermine the human rights of African people while ignoring the historical record of the U.S. in Africa and the geostrategic interest it is committed to upholding. The proceedings, side events, invitations, and public relations campaigns are designed to secure greater control of Africa's abundant resources for U.S. national interests and the interests of international finance capital. The U.S. claims that this summit will, quote, demonstrate the United States' enduring commitment to Africa and will underscore the importance of U.S.-Africa relations and increased cooperation on shared global priorities, end quote. The Black Alliance for Peace steps forward to expose such statements as disingenuous lies meant to cover up the United States' malicious intentions. Historically, the United States historically, the United States was and is the primary beneficiary of the genocidal capture, transshipment, and enslavement of African people, which is responsible for the presence of Black people in the United States today. At every turn, the USA has attacked, vilified, and tried to destroy every effort to free African people from various forms of oppression and exploitation. The U.S. worked hand in hand with the white supremacist European colonization of Africa, and when the people's resistance became too much for Europe to control, the U.S. took over as the new colonial masters by establishing the neo-colonial, neoliberal strategy that they come here to strengthen. Since the end of World War II, both the Democrats and Republicans have engaged in a vicious process of destabilizing African liberation movements and undermining African sovereignty. Democratically elected leaders such as Patrice Lumumba of the Congo were assassinated by the CIA. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana was overthrown in a CIA-orchestrated coup. These are only two of many who fell victim to U.S. government meddling. The U.S. waged a proxy war in the Congo with the assistance, which you just heard my brother Maurice talk about. Proxy war in the Congo with the assistance of Uganda and Rwanda, and in Somalia and Ethiopia from 2006 to 2009, followed by a sustained drone attacks of Somalia under the guise of fighting extremists. The U.S.-led NATO war demolished Libya, murdered Muammar Gaddafi, and killed thousands of Libyan citizens who they claimed to be protecting. The need to understand and make the connection between what happens in Africa and what happens to black people in the United States is paramount. The same forces that killed Gaddafi also killed Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Fred Hampton. The same U.S. intelligence agencies that overthrew the governments in Africa destroyed civil rights organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and Black Power organizations like the Black Panther Party. When we see these links, we can see the U.S. African Leaders Summit is about U.S. domination of black and African people everywhere. Today, the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, partners with 53 of the 54 countries on the continent of Africa, for the sole purpose of robbing Africa of its resources and exploiting the labor of the African masses. In one form or another, hegemony of Africa has been the policy of the USA for centuries, and there is no reason to believe that these policies and practices will change as a result of this farcical U.S. African Leaders Summit. One clear goal of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit is to challenge the inroads of the People's Republic of China, and to a lesser extent the Russian Federation have made what they've made on the continent. The Democrat, Republican parties and their corporate bosses want to halt the regional cooperation initiated in the Horn of Africa since 2018. They want to undermine anti-France and pro-Russian expressions among the people in countries like Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso, which are also invoking the legacy of revolutionaries like Modibo Keita, Sekou Touré, and Thomas Sankara. The Black Alliance for Peace wants to draw particular attention to the complicity of the mostly Democratic Party Congressional Black Caucus members over the role of the U.S. federal government in Africa. These people who claim to represent the interests of black people in the USA and the U.S. sit quiet in active dereliction of their professed purpose to safeguard the rights and interests of black and oppressed people. The Congressional Black Caucus are in cahoots with the African leaders who serve as the face of capitalism in the U.S. and imperialism in Africa. They are looking for cover in the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. Over the next week, they will wine and dine African leaders, make speeches, convene events, and make backdoor, under-the-table deals for the U.S. neocolonial, white supremacist patriarchal order. This summit is an insult to people of African descent inside and outside of Africa and must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. In contrast, the Black Alliance for Peace is holding an anti-imperialist week of action. We have a table out there where there's information about it and other positions. We also have a statement that we devised about the summit, and it's out on the table. The week of action is to raise awareness about related to the real issues that must be addressed about U.S.-Africa relations. We do not seek a place at the table and believe that the table should be turned over. The Black Alliance for Peace calls for the dismantling of NATO, AFRICOM, and all imperialist structures. Africa and the rest of the world cannot be free until all peoples are able to realize the right of sovereignty and the right to live free of domination. We call all progressive and peace-loving people to join us in an uncompromising anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-white supremacist, and anti-patriarchal movement for change. This is our urgent plea. If not for us, if not us, who? If not now, when? The Black Alliance for Peace demands are the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from Africa, the closure of U.S. bases throughout the world, and the Congressional Black Caucus to oppose the U.S. Africa Command and conduct hearings on AFRICOM's impact on the African continent with the full participation of members of U.S. and African civil society. We ask that you join us in this anti-imperialist week of action. Thank you. No compromise, no retreat. Black Lives for Peace.
Oh,
So
great stuff.
So actually, Human Love Solidarity, friend to the show, she just sent in the chat. Black Alliance for Peace is a nonprofit organization based in the United States that's focused on human rights from an anti-war, anti-imperialistic perspective. Yep.
Perspective.
Yep. So yeah, you can tell, obviously from, what they were saying that they're speaking from an anti-imperialist lens. But
earlier this year,
oh,
they attacked.
no.
Yeah, it does that.
Ew.
Yep, I got you. There you go.
Okay, I think I got it to the next slide.
Yeah.
So any thoughts, Reef, before we continue?
Interesting that he mentioned like patriarchal stuff in there.
Yeah.
Like there's not even a lot of African countries that focus on that,
Right.
issue.
Right. And I will go into this, but there were several countries, African countries, that were not invited to this summit.
Okay.
Mostly because, they were, I'm going to say it in my words, but basically essentially too radical, for, so that kind of gives you an impression of the African leaders who choose to be there, and just, yeah. So I think it's just the idea of like these African leaders who are there, you have to kind of question what are they there for,
Yeah.
So, but anyway, to continue, so if you want to go back to the slides.
Yep.
So the Black Alliance for Peace recognizes the U.S. African Leaders Summit, the organization states, as nothing more than collusion between neo-colonial powers and U.S. attempts to advance and maintain dominance over the continent, which you heard already. So actually, so these are their actions that were taking place throughout the week, and I think they will actually end on Friday. In contrast, the Black Alliance for Peace is holding an anti-imperialist week of actions to raise public awareness related to the real issues that should be on the agenda for discussion at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. BAP calls for the dismantling of NATO, AFRICOM, and all imperialist structures. Africa and the rest of the world cannot be free until all peoples are able to realize the right to sovereignty and the right to live free of domination. So we demand the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from Africa, the closure of U.S. bases throughout the world, and the Congressional Black Caucus to oppose AFRICOM and conduct hearings on AFRICOM's impact on the African continent with the full participation of members of the U.S. and African civil society. So I think about now, maybe a month ago, I did, I forgot the name of the journalist, but he did essentially an expose on AFRICOM. Basically, he's been involved in trying to figure out how many bases there actually are on the continent in Africa. And as of now, we don't know. They basically haven't said, we're not going to tell you shit as far as what we're doing and why we're there. Or just kind of giving a glance over, oh, we're here, just to monitor everything that's happening on the continent. So obviously, there's a lot more nefarious issues as to why AFRICOM is there. And the fact that most of the countries in Africa are members of AFRICOM, that is also concerning. But more concerning is, like we don't know entirely for sure. And I think when we checked, there were around 40 that we know of, meaning that they could be potentially a lot more than what they're saying, which I feel is definitely true. So, but yeah, like I said, we reported on that. If you want to go back, we definitely clipped out a segment on AFRICOM. You can definitely check on our channel for that, as well as the live stream that came from as well. But to continue, the Biden administration invited leaders of 49 African countries. The exceptions were Burkina Faso, Eritrea, Guinea, Mali, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, and Somaliland. An unnamed senior administration official was quoted in a transcript of a December 8th background press call as citing the African Union suspending most of these countries for why they were not invited. A background press call is meant to provide off-the-record information to invited press, hence officials went nameless in the transcript. Toward Freedom was not invited. However, longtime colonizer and U.S. ally France recently announced the removal of military troops in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. This came after coups and instability in these countries. Mali has also recently banned French NGOs. Guinea also experienced a coup in 2021 that appeared to be welcomed by its population. Meanwhile, the United States does not recognize Western Sahara or the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic as a sovereign state. While the officials mentioned various civilian-led entities the United States has deployed to cultivate leadership on the continent, none of them spoke about AFRICOM. This is one of 11 combat and technical military structures the United States has deployed throughout the world to ensure control of shipping lanes and resources. AFRICOM's press officer has denied commerce is its only interest, while acknowledging it is one of AFRICOM's reasons for being. Meanwhile, in 2022's posture statement to the U.S. Congress states, Africa sits astride 6 strategic chokeholds and sea lines of communication, enables a third of the world's shipping, and holds vast mineral resources. When access through these strategic chokeholds is blocked, global markets suffer. And as I said, obviously, they do a lot more than that. And part of their job is also to, they hold military bases in several countries. And as I said, given the expose that we kind of talked about a month ago, we're not exactly sure how many military bases are on the continent. So, friend of the show who's been on our show before, DJ Joe Nice, he tweeted this out earlier today, where he states, the United States had a summit with African leaders and pledged $55 billion over 3 years. Meanwhile, Ukraine has received significantly more money over a shorter time frame. If this U.S.-Africa summit is not about reparations, this meeting is a waste of time. Moreover, where is the Congressional Black Caucus? Why are they not talking about reparations for the African diaspora at this meeting? Of course, they are not there. The Congressional Black Caucus remains impotent and useless. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts?
Other than I'm surprised nobody else was talking about this. Like I definitely didn't know, and I'm following them. So,
right.
And they're following me. Like,
right.
And I still didn't know.
Yeah.
It just shows you that reach on that kind of stuff is not great. Also the fact that like it's one of those things where I don't feel like awareness is the problem anymore.
No.
Like,
no, I think right now it's just like ignorance at this point. And then, as I keep saying, Africa gets no love. Like Africa, you don't hear any. It's hard to find, like obviously from my other channel, like I haven't worked on it in like about close to a year now. But even trying to find stuff like to talk about is extremely difficult unless if I talk to someone on the ground directly, or if it just happens to come in mainstream media, which usually leads to the bottom of like any search.
They talked about Fred Hampton in that video. There was a reason why he was shot. The reason is that he preached a particular like set of actions. It's the actions that I think are the important part here, where yes, he did talk about how education was part of those actions, but they're part of those actions.
Right.
Like,
right.
You know, the one person that I know of recently that has probably talked to more people about the message of whatever you want to say we support here, you know, has been Rome.
Right.
Being out there, talking to people and doing right by them at the same time. So I think that says a lot.
Right.
You know,
the fact that the Uhuru movement, you know, the CIA busted them a few months ago, you know, all of it. It's just a lot of the stories that we kind of reported on. It's just kind of, and war that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in my next segment. It just all kind of relates.
When talking about the FBI doing that, the first thing that Omali Yeshitela told me about it, the first thing he thought was Fred Hampton. And it's like, I don't need to hear more than that. I knew what he meant. That guy was shot through the wall by the FBI.
Right.
And he was thinking about his like wife and family, and like that sucks. That because he who's been doing actions for his country and countrymen and like fellow man, he is then raided. Like they're popping flashbangs in his windows.
Right.
Like flying drones by his head. Like this is
it. I just had a thought, and it's kind of morbid, but you know, but I think this is just more of a reason why, you know, for people like me who has more of a multicultural background.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm pretty sure, and the thing is, unfortunately, a lot of African leaders, they do not know the stories that I think at least that we kind of talk about and RBN talks about, you know, as far as Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, MLK, even Kwame Ture, who we talk about frequently. You know, I feel like or at least if they do, it'd be a very Windows surface level knowledge of our revolutionary figures in the West. If there was more awareness of those figures on the African continent and how it ties to the issues that are happening in many of these African countries currently, given a lot of the coups, a lot of, you know, destable governments, a lot of puppet governments being set up by the West, often than not by the hands of the African leaders who are in those countries, either one or two things will happen. Either, you know, they won't come, you know, to a summit like this, or they would ask for demands as far as, which is what DJ Joe Nice kind of mentioned. They'll be asking for demands in terms of like, you know, how there could be like economic and social justice in terms of like what's happening in Africa right now on the continent as a whole, and how the implications of what has happened in the past in terms of imperialism and neo-colonialism has impacted, you know,
I think you're starting to see more of that for sure.
Right.
You
right.
know, I see plenty of African leaders that went to COP27 to do exactly that. You know, I think you are seeing a shift in this multipolar situation where, you know, African countries are saying that they have a voice and are willing to say that they have demands. They're not just, and the West is still trying to dictate what all that should be. So, you know, and plenty of those same leaders who pushed actions as opposed to, you know, like you have to organize over what you're for. You know what you get to do while you're doing that? organize for what you're against as well.
Right.
Like, because you're doing the work, you have to do that directly for what you're for.
Right.
So
I just feel like for me looking at this, there has to be, and unfortunately, given, relationships, with Black Westerners here and then in Africa, in general, I would argue, and this is my personal, just for what I've experienced and what I kind of see is not the best. But, but I feel this is more of a reason why there needs to be better connections in terms of, like either Africans coming over and kind of learning about the reality of what's happening in the US, again, from a non-imperialist lens. And then conversely, us, again, with an anti-imperialist lens, being able or being willing to travel to Africa and kind of sharing the reality of, of what's happening in the West, so that it can cause a little bit more of a stir in terms of having Africans kind of second guess our relationships, with the West more, the US, UK, and France, like I interviewed my mentor, Ronnie. Those of you who watched our anniversary stream may saw that interview that I did with him. And off camera, he told me, like, you are me, you are a bridge because you understand both sides. And you have the unique task of trying to bring both sides together in terms of having the understanding and having lived in Africa and hearing our story, but then obviously living, and I think more so now, having more of a political development and awakening, definitely since 2015, 2016, and having the realization of how shit, the West has been, I think just overall, in terms of its exploitation, of Africa, but more especially now, trying to reintroduce itself, onto the African continent. So I think just being aware of that, but I think having the unique ability to kind of see that and being able to talk to Africans about that. But, obviously, like I can't do that by myself, obviously. So, which makes me more thankful for like channels like RBN, like who are able to share that. And I hope they go more into, and I think shout out to Nick, who does think on a more foreign policy lens, has actually had, international guests on and talk to them. My only hope is that that also kind of extends to Africa as well, which I know is obviously going to be a little tricky given the tech. Yeah. But I hope, or even with us, like as we grow, I hope that's something I'm able to develop more so that we're able to hear more of those. And again, I don't really want to know so much about African leadership. I want to hear more from people on the ground who are actually doing the work and are actually like my mentor, who are can share more of the reality of what they're seeing, with the people in those countries there. So,
well, yeah, just I agree. We definitely should be doing that. I think a lot of those African leaders you talk about, especially Kwame Ture, has mentioned infiltration being a problem quite a few times.
Right.
Which, is still an issue.
Right.
I think there's lots of problems with, what do they call that? I mean, those are psyops, right? Technically.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, so this was put out, that and I don't know if it was a leak or if it was just information that got put out, by, we'll get to it in a bit, but apparently, Oath Keepers, which is a, like Proud Boy adjacent, they were around for January 6th, right? Like kind of right-wingy militia group, if that makes sense, that are pretty famous in that regard. But apparently a lot of their rank and file were filled with Department of Homeland Security members. So This is from Brett Wilkins over at Common Dreams. So hundreds of oath keepers have worked for DHS in recent years, report finds. This probably represents at the tip of the iceberg as far as federal law enforcement officers that have been involved in or supported the activities of far-right militia groups, said one expert, which we've talked about a lot as well. So hundreds of oath keepers said that they are or were employed by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. A report published Monday found a revelation that comes about 2 weeks after 2 leaders of the far-right militia were convicted of seditious conspiracy in connection with the January 6th insurrection. Extremism within our government is always alarming, but even more so in a department with a law enforcement and national security nexus like DHS. So in a joint investigation with the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the OCCRP, man, they've got to be real busy these days. You know, I think they've been around the water cooler a little too much. They need to get back to some work. There's too much to do at that place. The Project on Government Oversight, again, another group of hard workers, right? Found that more than 300 people on a leaked Oath Keepers membership list described themselves as current or former employees of Department of Homeland Security agencies, including Border Patrol, Coast Guard, Immigrations and Customs informants, and the Secret Service. So yeah, it's ICE. But experts voiced alarm over far-right extremists who, according to DHS, pose the greatest domestic terrorism threat, working in a federal agency responsible for combating extremism. So somewhere the things don't add up. DHS saying that this is the greatest domestic terrorism threat, right? Far-right extremism, and then a ton of them are part of one of those groups. Like, what do you think is going on there?
I mean, you're not surprised. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, again, considering January 6th, you know, and just the idea, like, a lot, like, I'm just going to say it, like, as more of that stereotype, but a lot of stereotypes, as they say, are based in reality. A lot of cops are right-wingers.
Yes.
You know? So,
yep.
Like, so to me, and Ed in the chat was just kind of like, in the voice of Fry from, what's that show? Futurama. Yeah, shocked. Well, not really that shocked,
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, and water's wet.
Yes.
So, yeah, so it's just like, no, it doesn't surprise me.
I think it's revealing, we're friends with Convo Couch, who was there at that supposed insurrection, alleged. Which we all know that if that was anywhere near left wing, they wouldn't have made it to the first steps. Like, they got miniguns in the walls, people. Like, we wouldn't have made it.
No, George Floyd, like...
Yes.
You couldn't even... Like, I was there. Like, they had every piece of equipment, excessively so, against the crowds there. You couldn't even get within the plaza of the White House.
No.
So... But these guys, and I say it because, and I've said it on stream before, I was like, that was a couple of days before the Force to Vote protests that I helped to organize and be a part of. And the Capitol Police was giving us a hard time.
Right.
Even though we had a permit, even though like we were walking around the perimeter of Congress, that we were instructed to do, which to me makes no damn sense, but whatever.
Yeah.
We weren't causing any trouble, but because we stopped at several places, not in Congress office, and we were like across the street from Congress itself, that was a problem. And like, they were ready to arrest Jackson Hinkle and Nico and others because according to them, we were not walking, that we were taking our sweet time, You know,
Oh.
they were ready to arrest us then. And it was like, I want to say a group of us at that time at any given point was a group of 30 of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were coming after us to talk about Medicare for all, and in light of the squad forcing the vote, but they let this crowd in essentially into the halls of Congress. And funny enough, in hindsight, like, because I applied for the permit, and they asked me what was happening in DC was no secret. Like, people knew or were expecting this. So, like, I don't want it to make it seem, because like mainstream media feel like or kind of reports that oftentimes that like this was sudden. No, it wasn't sudden. Like, I knew about it. Like,
well,
but when I was applying for the permit, like, they were basically asking me, like, I don't even remember exactly what they asked, but the implication was, are you a part of a group that essentially was going to cause trouble? And I was like,
maybe.
I didn't know how to answer that, but I was kind of like,
hopefully.
But I kind of knew what they were talking about, so I said no. But they knew. They knew, like, we did it, I believe it was January 4th, if I remember correctly. 2 days later, the event happens. They knew. So.
Yeah. Well, and Convo Couch said then, they continue to say that whole place is full of feds, as they would like to put it. So they let these people in the door.
Right.
Like, this is and partially, we're not sure if this is the complete reasoning, but it got easy funding for congressional police.
Yes.
So
and and again, keep in mind, we weren't allowed on the property, like on Congress ground, for us to vote. We weren't even allowed anywhere near it. We were allowed the perimeter, but even then we couldn't stay there.
So Brett continues, if I go to this, that one active law enforcement official joining militia group is one too many. Mike German, a former undercover FBI agent who has infiltrated white supremacist and far-right extremist groups, just in case you were forgetting that they also did that, told Pogo this probably represents at the tip of the iceberg as far as federal law enforcement officers that have been involved in or supported the activities of far-right militia groups like the Oath Keepers. According to the report, which says, despite its rhetoric opposing government oppression, Oath Keepers is seen by many as hostile to civil liberties and rights. It has deployed armed groups in response to protests against police brutality against black people, such as in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 and 2015, and at Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. Many protesters and observers saw the Oath Keepers' presence as intimidating and in opposition to calls for police accountability. Several members have left the group because they felt it was too extreme, according to several on the leaked list contracted by the OCCRP and POGO. At least one prominent ex-member has decried racism within its ranks, even though the group's bylaws bars members from discrimination, violence, or hatred towards any person based upon their race, nationality, creed, or color. The new report follows the November 29th conviction of two Oath Keepers, founder Stuart Rhodes and Florida chapter leader Kelly Meggs, on sedition conspiracy charges for their roles in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by supporters of former President Donald Trump and his, quote, big lie that the 2020 presidential election was stolen. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of confirms a lot of what we were talking about. What we've been talking about, that there's, spooks all over the place in these organizations. Patriot Front is another one that has been known to be like connected with deep state stuff, like Proud Boys also. So, Ghost Art said feds infiltrated Standing Rock too. You know, I wouldn't doubt it. So yeah.
No, I think, especially being in this space and even on Twitter, I'm not too concerned about it, but it does make me worry just in the fact like I think right now I have over 2,500 like people sub to me, and I'm sure fairly positive many of them are feds.
Sure.
Bots, like, so it kind of intimidates me a little bit. Like, I'm still gonna tweet my mess anyway, but it does concern me as far as, thinking like, who's watching me, what is being reported, will I get, suspended or permanently banned, that kind of thing. Like, I do think about that, especially, in terms of my job, if that ever kind of gets elevated to the point where, like my livelihood would be affected. Hopefully not, but I mean, again, what is what, that feds everywhere. So it just kind of, again, it's just not surprising to me. And given and I know this kind of went viral on Twitter, I think today you showed me that clip of the cops, kind of
fucking giant right hand to the guy.
Yeah. Like, do you remember where? I want to say.
I think Nick shared it. If people want to go find that at Socialist MMA.
We can probably do it later, but yeah, like, but a lot of these guys are right wingers.
Yes.
Who very much
ex-military,
ex-military, like the ones who were picked on in high school, whatever else. So having that chip on their shoulder and like feeling now they have power because they have a gun and a badge and seemingly power that they can just do whatever they want with people without any consequence. So yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense to me. So, and I think our audience is smart enough and aware enough that that's the case. But, again, like, I feel like, so when, again, it's something very damning when the squad funds Capitol Police a lot more, the ones who allow January 6th to happen, essentially, which makes no damn sense. But then that also kind of relates to our extra story that we reported on regarding Tara Reid. You'll hear more about that tomorrow. It just kind of all relates in terms of their role and like how in a lot of ways the Democrats are kind of complicit in a lot of this mess that they seemingly do it in the guise of, oh, we want to protect our nation from X, Y, and Z, whereas many of these people are right wing and they're kind of enabling that.
Speaking of like, prepping our nation thing, yeah, like
so as I said, maybe months ago, I think over the summer, be prepared for this, which I think actually kind of relates to your final story for tonight.
Yeah.
But you see the two flags. We got United States and China, and what I titled this segment is "Prepping for War." Why would I call it that? Ilhan Omar, which I happened to see a couple of days ago, tweeted this out, where she writes, "The annual Pentagon spending bill now totals over $850 billion." Now, keep in mind, like, going back to my first story, the U.S. is providing Africa with $55 million over 3 years. The Pentagon is getting almost $1 trillion in spending. Like, priorities. Anyway, that's more than $55 billion over what the president requested. It is unconscionable to spend a record-breaking amount on our defense budget while thousands of Minnesotans in my district struggle to make ends meet. Pentagon spending now totals more than transportation, veterans, education, justice, international affairs, the environment, housing, science, space, job training, and employment combined. Our spending priorities should reflect our values. It is not moral to spend more money on the Pentagon budget than we spend on priorities that impact the daily lives of my constituents. We have a responsibility to reduce our exorbitant military budget and spend more money on housing, education, childcare, and healthcare. I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Not only does this legislation further fund endless wars, but it continues to harm our reputation around the world. It includes egregious funding to extend the failed war on drugs mentality in Colombia that has led to some of the worst human rights abuses in the world. It also prohibits the closing of Guantanamo and removes uncongressional provisions related to the war in Yemen, which Bernie fucked up, by the way.
Yup.
Let's be clear, spending on this money on Pentagon bloat does not make us safer. We can focus our energy on critical efforts like assisting the Ukrainian people in fighting off an illegal Russian invasion. No.
Fuck you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Without spending over $850 billion on wasteful contracts. For these reasons, I oppose this bill. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, most of what Ilhan said there, I agree with. You know, but as I said, there's a lot more that she didn't say that I'm sure she may not be aware of, that Andre Damon from World Socialist website apparently reported. Record U.S. military budget prepares for, quote unquote, future conflict with China.
Hmm.
And so he writes, thank you. With no serious public debate or discussion, the U.S. House of Representatives voted Thursday to spend nearly $1 trillion on the military over the next year, funding the proxy war in Ukraine against Russia and plans for a military conflict with China. The vast majority of both Democrats and Republicans in the House voted to spend another $858 billion on the U.S. military, a figure $45 billion higher than President Joe Biden had requested and 8% higher than last year's budget. The principal target of the bill is China, with congressional lawmakers publicly discussing preparations for war with the world's most populous country in barely veiled terms. So notice how they said, like, they had no time to read through it, which is very typical for a lot of these bills. Like, I think they're given, like, depending
a
on
day
minutes
or something like, yeah.
or a day, and, like, the packet is, like, as thick as, like, a ream of paper, basically. So yeah, Ilhan, like, right, you said mostly the right things, but, like, are you aware that, like, this money is in preparation for future war, basically? And if you're aware of, yeah, she sounded the alarm, kind of, but, like, the question is, what is she planning to do about it, is the question. So, but anyway, continue. This year's National Defense Authorization Act takes concrete steps forward preparing for a future conflict with China by investing in American hard power, strengthening American posture in the Indo-Pacific, and supporting our allies, Wisconsin Republican Representative Mike Gallagher said. In a press statement, Gallagher praised the fact that the bill provides similar drawdown authority to arm Taiwan as we have Ukraine. Despite the war in Ukraine being used as the justification for the massive surge in military spending, the central focus of the bill is U.S. preparations for military conflict with China. For the first time in U.S. history, the United States is directly arming Taiwan, providing $10 billion in arms over 10 years. The direct arming of Taiwan strikes yet another major blow at the One China policy. Taiwan is by far the most referenced geographic area in the bill, with 438 mentions, more than Russia with 237, and Ukraine with 159. The bill ends the requirement that the Pentagon provides competitive contracts for military procurement, opening the door to massive price gouging by military contractors Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing, which are already posting record profits fueled by the bloody U.S.-provoked war with Ukraine. Whether you call it wartime contracting or emergency contracting, we can't play around anymore, a senior congressional aide told Defense News earlier this year. This wartime contracting means that arms dealers will be free to charge taxpayers effectively whatever they want with no serious oversight or regulation. Even as Congress slashes funding for vital measures to save lives in the COVID pandemic, including vaccines and testing, it is recklessly throwing money at the Pentagon. Every department of every service will get more money without exception. The U.S. Navy would get $32 billion for new warships, including 3 R. Lee Burke-class destroyers and 2 Virginia-class submarines. And the Pentagon is authorized to purchase a further 36 F-35 aircraft, each costing approximately $89 million, or enough to build 6 school buildings. The bill continues the current transformation of the U.S. military from a force aimed primarily at subjugating and terrorizing former colonies, such as Iraq and Afghanistan, into one prepared to fight wars with, quote-unquote, peer competitors, such as Russia and China. Commenting on the planned retirement of the A-10 Warhawk attack aircraft,
Hold on. I think it. Yeah.
Wait. Okay, here we go. The U.S. media has largely ignored the House passage of the largest military budget in U.S. history, treating it as a routine event, of course. But what coverage does exist of U.S. military spending has been devoted to demands for its expansion. The bills include a major concession to fascistic forces that make up a substantial section of the U.S. military, repealing the COVID-19 mandate for military personnel 30 days after the bill's passage. Ahead of the House passage from the NDAA, the U.S. military announced a dramatic increase in weapons production, vowing to triple annual production of 155mm artillery shells. Oh. Someone's saying there's no sound.
I fixed it. I already have them.
Okay. We want to be able to build our stocks to not just where we started the war, but higher. We're posturing for a pretty, over a period of 3 years, a dramatic increase in conventional artillery ammunition production, Doug Bush, the Assistant Secretary for the Army for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, said last week. The passage of this bill is aimed at putting into practice a series of military strategy documents released earlier this year, which proclaimed the 2020s the decisive decade in the U.S. struggle for world domination. In June, the U.S.-led NATO alliance pledged to prepare for high-intensity, multi-domain warfighting against nuclear-armed peer competitors such as Russia and China. In October, the U.S. National Security Strategy pledged to win the competition of the 21st century. Declaring that our strategy is rooted in our national interests, the document pledges to modernize and strengthen our military so it is equipped for the era of strategic competition. Critically, the document declares that war abroad is a means of achieving domestic goals, saying, the United States has a tradition of transforming foreign challenges into opportunities to spur rejuvenation at home. What does that sound like to you?
Sounds like what we've been saying.
Yeah. The entire U.S. political establishment is united behind plans for escalating its conflict with Russia and China to be paid through a deepening offensive against the social rights of the U.S. population. Yeah, I think that's it. And thinking about this, when I saw this over the weekend and in light of the summit, this is going to affect Africa in a big way. So, you know, just given their neutral stance on Russia, and many of these countries have deals in China as far as infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
That's going to put them in, which, considering the timing, I don't think it's much of a coincidence in a sense.
No.
I feel like this is a way of kind of enticing Africans to say, you need to work with us because right now, Russia and China, we're going to basically go into war with them, and basically there is no way that you can do any trade or work on any infrastructure in your countries anymore. You have no choice but to work with us if you want, which I think is the most, again, this is just my speculation, but I don't think I'm too far off the mark on that. I think it's the most sadistic and the most horrendous thing, like the US is planning to do, because they want to kind of be, the world power, whereas, and we mentioned this on the show, this is their fault. Like what's happening in China is of our doing, especially given with NAFTA. So, it's just that China took advantage of the situation and now have become extremely profitable, and the US is basically like, fuck this, like we can't have that. So, and Russia as well. Russia has proven that they're able to withstand somewhat, being isolated, in terms of, their economic development. They've been able to kind of withstand that. So, and China as well. China is basically independent of any foreign power, like right now. So, like,
and they're doing it. They're like building infrastructure. They're doing like the same. Right. They're like, hey, you need school? We'll build that. Hey, you need it. It's like we're walking right into the economic trap that, like, I don't think it's going to go well for us.
It's not going to go well, but I think especially in the global south, it's definitely not going to go well for them.
I think they're going to do better than us in this case. Like,
but I think it depends. I think it depends. I think it depends where. I think maybe in Latin America, I think we'll be okay because they're already kind of making that moves as far as being more socialist and kind of recognizing how
moving away
US
from
and moving away from the US.
Western
Africa,
hegemony.
unfortunately, it's not. Well, I wouldn't say they have that same stronghold. Like, the West still wants Africa, but I think especially more given like their relationship with China, more especially, like that's where I see a lot of those issues in Africa on the forefront. It's in particular.
Yeah.
So. And as I said, I don't think it's a coincidence that they had this summit days after or before this legislation went through.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there were a lot of talks regarding this, or kind of in the veil.
Please don't murder us. Probably is in the like. Yeah, I mean, either way,
we're fucked.
So whatever. But in other terrible news.
Which also relates.
Yes. There's military in the schools. I don't know if people knew. It's been happening for a while. I find it interesting that the New York Times is picking it up. That they've been grooming our children. Caitlin Johnstone writes that military. Go ahead.
Not all children.
No, not all children. Military groomers are increasingly infiltrating U.S. high schools. This is Caitlin Johnstone, of course. People should go check out her Substack. Links are in the description below, as always. So, Caitlin writes, a New York Times report has found that enrollment in the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, a Pentagon-funded program designed to groom children for military service, is increasingly becoming mandatory in U.S. high schools.
Pause right there. Again,
yes,
this is where a lot of this money is also going to.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jesus Christ.
Becoming mandatory.
Right.
Okay.
Not elective.
So, I also wanted to say, I grew up in a very rural area. right? Both like low income, rural areas are where these programs shine because they want their kids to have somewhere to go, and this will get them there a lot better. They end up in officers programs and things like that. So JROTC programs taught by military veterans at some 3,500 high schools across the country are supposed to be elective. And the Pentagon has said that requiring students to take them goes against its guidelines. The report says, but the New York Times found that thousands of public school students were being funneled into the classes without ever having chosen them, either as an explicit requirement or by being automatically enrolled. While Pentagon officials have long insisted that JROTC is not a recruiting tool, sorry, what? Like, really, Pentagon? How do you insist on something so wrong? That's the thing. Like, eventually you got to be like, okay, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, they have openly discussed expanding the $400 million a year program, whose size has already tripled since the 1970s, as a way of drawing more young people into military service. How the fuck? Then that is not a fucking recruiting tool, Pentagon. How? You just said, the Army says 44% of all soldiers who entered its ranks in recent years came from a school that offered JROTC, the Times reports. So, yeah. There it is. In high schools across the U.S., thousands of students are being placed in the military's JROTC classes without choosing them on their own. The only word I can think of is indoctrination, one parent said. I mean, yes. Welcome to the U.S. school system.
Right.
Like, and before you ask, no. The Pentagon's grooming program is not being forced on kids in Malibu and the Hamptons, says Caitlin.
Exactly. And keep reading. I saw the last part. Keep reading the last paragraph, and then I have thoughts about it.
A vast majority of the schools were those high enrollment numbers were attended by a large population of non-white students and those from low-income households, the Times reported, naming Detroit, LA, Philadelphia, Oklahoma City, and Mobile, Alabama, as cities where high schools are funneling kids into the program en masse.
I mean, it's not surprising, but like, you know, like obviously, like if you are in a private school or if you happen to live in an affluent area where you have to go to a public school, you don't have to worry about this. Like, this is meant for the low income class in rural areas and in cities.
Yep.
Where, as you said, Reef, and you lived in a rural area. I lived in a low income, high poverty area in New Jersey. So like, I went to private school, so I avoided most of this. But I know, like, with my other peers who went to public school, like an option, for like, and funny enough, my mom asked me one time if I wanted to consider, going into the Marines or whatever. And I said, fuck no. And that was the first only time she ever had to ask me. Because my older siblings said to me from young, do not go fight in a white man's war. Their words. That's not even my parents.
Famously, Ali had to go through an entire process. Like, back when he was what? He wasn't even Ali then. That was Cassius Clay, during the Nam War. Like, and he called out that shit then. So, but defenders of the mandatory JROTC enrollment reportedly cite the need to divert students away from drugs or violence and the allure of drugs and gangs in urban areas, as though corralling them into the single most violent gang on earth is deterrent from violence and gangs. Also not a deterrent from drugs. Ask those Desert Storm guys. They found opium. Like, they were perfectly happy there. Nam guys found weed. Like, smoking it out of shotguns. Like, anyway. Grooming students to go kill foreigners for crude oil is not my idea of a healthy diversion from youthful error, but maybe that's just me. And I think it goes more than that. This is not just like, people don't know what those, like, classes do. They force those kids to go in uniform to school multiple times a week, you know, and like that then indoctrinates the rest of the kids.
Right.
Like,
actually, those of you in the chat who are younger than me, which is some of you, let me know if, like, especially if you're male, like, if you were 18, if you had anything, if you had to make sure that you were in selective service, like, if that was, because I remember that was a thing.
Yep, still is.
When I was, it still is. Okay, but I remember that being a thing. For me, like when I was in high school, like, and to the point where my school was like, make sure you sign up, even though, like, I went to a private school. Not one of us were going to go into the military at all. Like, I think.
Yes, but you have to, because the draft still exists technically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
We have to go do that. Like, you burn that card, that's a federal, like.
But you know what? It's funny, they can do that automatically, but don't give you the right
voting
to
card.
vote.
Yep. Yes.
Automatically.
It would probably be a good time to remind readers that poverty in the United States is one of the Pentagon's most effective recruiting tools, with Army officials explicitly acknowledging that young people's inability to afford a college education on their own is responsible for their success in meeting recruitment goals, and U.S. lawmakers warning that helping people pay off crushing student debt will hurt recruitment. U.S. military recruiters have an established record of targeting poor schools because impoverished communities often see military service as their only chance at upward mobility. So because now war is uncool with Gen Z, they're going to be like, oh, so we're going to force you to do it. Well, and recently, me and you remember that U.S. lawmakers say student loan forgiveness will hurt military recruiting. We definitely remember covering that. So, I mean, the New York Times describes a cult-like environment in these JROTC programs where parents in some cities say their children are being forced to put on military uniforms, obey a chain of command, and recite patriotic declarations in classes they never wanted to take, with special textbooks which at times falsify or downplay the failings of the U.S. government. And if even the New York Times believes you're falsifying and downplaying the failings of the U.S. government, it's got to be pretty bad. So every day I see U.S. conservatives mindlessly bleating about groomers in the LGBT community, trying to turn children into sexual deviants, claiming kids are being indoctrinated in school by learning about gay marriage and respect for trans people, but none of them seem to have any problem with the real-life indoctrination and grooming kids are subjected to by the most murderous and depraved institution in the world. One of the dumbest things happening in mainstream Western political discourse right now is the way conservatives are increasingly framing themselves as society's last bulwark against the normalization of child molestation, something which has been growing reliably less normalized and more aggressively rejected across the entire political spectrum for generations. But sure, pretend the ideology which wants to drag civilizations back to the days of Boy Scouts, the Catholic Church, and fathers reigning supreme over their household and everyone in it, are the ones protecting us from the rape of children. The most consequential groomers of our day are not LGBT people and their allies, but the adults who are grooming children to violently enact the will of the most tyrannical regime on earth, with the full support of their government. And yet so far, it's been mostly conservatives who I've seen defending the news and mandatory JROTC enrollment in impoverished neighborhoods. They're not just fine with this kind of indoctrination, they actively support it. And to them, Caitlin can only say, okay, groomer. Caitlin, with shots fired. Shots fired from Caitlin. You know? So, I don't know. Yeah.
Jamon in the chat said, I'm going to be honest, it's good exercise. Yeah, it's good exercise if you want it.
Yes, so is band, so is football,
right.
so is baseball, so is every other extracurricular.
Right.
Like,
but again, like growing up, like for me, this was done as an elective. Like that was something that you chose to do, not something that is mandatory for you to do.
Right.
And again, like if it should be mandatory, why is it not offered at every school in the country?
Right.
You know, rich parents are not going to go for that.
Well, and this is,
or places in some might, but like the majority will not because they don't want their babies, their trust fund babies.
I want you to think. Do you know what? One of the biggest supporters of our like military-industrial complex, the APAC lobby. Do you know what their country does? They have mandatory enrollment in military service.
Right. Yeah.
So this is partially. I wonder if they're testing something like that. I know. I'm not sure if it was. Yeah. The Jammin said, yeah, Israel has mandatory service. You know, I could see this being a source of propaganda and the U.S. using a similar system.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, I mean, this is. You know, I don't want to make that like reference too close to Israel, but you know, there was a particular youth group that was created in Germany, you know, that the Boy Scouts were modeled after, technically. You know, so yeah, it's just all marketing and terrible propaganda and
terrible propaganda and a way to ensure that they get
I find it
in when now it's kind of a lot harder to because and I think it again it's ironic that they're doing this with the people who are very more likely or willing to start a revolution in the country, that they're trying to cut them at the pass and being like, no, we're going to get you when you're in high school.
Yes.
Before you
and revert that revolutionary thing to put all that violence choosing in our pocket.
Right.
But an interesting that Caitlin, who a lot of people would say is too radical, horseshoed all the way over to the right wing, talking about the hypocrisy of the right wing here.
Right.
And they would probably call her anti-trans plenty of times and anti-LGBT. And here she is defending LGBT being taught in schools over the military-industrial complex. You know, and she says something, I think, what I want to get her words. One of the dumbest things happening in mainstream Western political discourse right now is the way conservatives are increasingly framing themselves as society's last bulwark against the normalization of child molestation. I mean, you know, tomorrow we have a little special for Tara where we talked about a lot of that, where the right wing is allowed to be right. We're giving them plenty of ammo to use.
Right.
You know.
Right.
While also not taking care of the things we actually care about.
Right.
You know, it's this whole identity stuff and they get to win this.
Right.
You know.
I mean, there are no good actors here, but I think ultimately it just makes me very sad because I know, again, like growing up, you know, for many people, you know, even people like within my family, you know, like they considered this an option because they couldn't afford college any other way, or they wanted to get out of their, you know, situation, especially if they're low income, or like whether they're in a rural area or in a city, and they saw no way out, and feeling like the military was the only way to go. But then it's just kind of like, again, I don't have a problem with necessarily people going in there, but you have to know what you're getting yourself into. Mm-hmm. You know, like I know Kit very recently, I think this week kind of talked about that in terms of like, you know, feeling like, not to say he didn't have a choice, but I think he made a conscious effort to go into the military, you know, like in college or whatever. So, you know, but I wouldn't mind all of this if this was either a conscious choice, or if you're gonna make it mandatory for everybody. But they're not gonna do that, because ultimately this is going to affect the elites who do not want their children to go off to war. So you can't have them going, because they're the ones who kind of run the companies, of which are going to, like, they're going to be the ones who are going to ostracize these people who eventually might be the workers, in their company, so yeah, it sucks, but again, it just kind of like our theme. I think we didn't do this intentionally, but it just seems to be the theme of like how war is kind of connected, like I think for us kind of on a local level, in terms of like, for me, especially as a teacher, not a high school teacher, but something, having to maybe kind of in the rain or being kind of in the industry where I would have to kind of think about this, to more internationally where countries are going to be affected with potentially more war, that's going to affect us too.
Yeah.
But I think, our relationships with other countries abroad, I think, are going to be put into question over the next few years. So,
yeah.
But as we kind of said, especially given Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last summer, we kind of suspected something is up. And given what we kind of reported tonight, it seems like the chess pieces are kind of set for more fuckery, down the road. So stay tuned.
Yep. Tomorrow we've got premiering Tara Reid special from us, where we went through the entire Tucker interview on Tucker Today, which is behind a paywall. So we got a few clips from that. So people should definitely tune in at 8 p.m. tomorrow, Eastern time.
So yeah, so we recorded it last night, so we're preparing it tomorrow. I will try and be in the chat, depending on what I'm doing, so you can hang out with me there in chat. But yeah, I think it was important for us to kind of talk about, our colleague and friend in the space and in this network, just in terms of like, we're glad that her story is getting more attention. People are arguing, the wrong attention with the wrong person. But hell, the people that we wanted that should be talking about it are not. So, and Tucker has a large audience. So you got to take what you can get. But I think, not to give too much away, I think it's definitely worth you watching our segment tomorrow. But Tara talks about a lot that we've kind of talked about on our show, and other channels have talked about on their show, which obviously given, obviously like a lot of people who saw that 5-minute clip that was already put out on YouTube, obviously I'm going to talk about this sexual assault, which is damning in of itself. But Tara goes into a lot deeper than that, which I think I think will interest a lot of you.
Yeah.
But it also kind of relates as far as a lot of what, people like in REN, we have Heartlands Media and others have kind of shared, regarding underbellies, of Congress and how it truly is and how ultimately it affected Tara even today. So,
and she'll be going on Sabby Sunday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And she was on the recent episode that Kim Iverson did as well. People should check that out. What are we doing? I don't know if I'm doing Reef After Dark Friday. It's been a hell of a week, so we'll see. But who else am I missing? Thursday, anything? Friday, something maybe. Warren will probably have a secret show Friday.
Over the weekend, yes. How do we miss that Sunday? Not sure when Tara's going live
next
again.
I don't know.
Yeah.
She's having issues scheduling with working with Kim now, so we'll figure that out. So,
Okay. And then we
how do we miss that Sunday night?
Possibly Jesse Tuesday, Crab, maybe.
Do you have a guest for next week? Did we book one for next week? What is next week?
No.
Christmas?
No.
No. No,
We
the
booked
28th.
in the new
What are we
year.
doing that? What are we doing that week?
Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing. Well, we don't know yet. We're still talking about it. Because I might be in New Jersey that week. So, but yeah, we're, probably as it is the end of the year, we're not entirely sure what we're going to be up to. If anything, best case scenario, we'll probably pre-record something ahead of time, and put it out. But we'll definitely be here at least next week for sure. The following week, the week of Christmas in between, is kind of spotty right now, but we'll let you guys know. Again, best case scenario, we'll probably pre-record something for that Wednesday, but we do have a guest in the new year. Won't say yet, but he or she did confirm. So I'll follow up with this person, and yeah, we'll have a special guest on Nine in the News January 4th. So, stay tuned for that.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
That's
it.
I am once again asking for your financial support.
As always, you can find all ways to support us at the network at that little URL going across the screen, indienews.network. You should be able to find us there, as well as all the links to all the members and channels. Try to get a sub count. We definitely want those 1K subs soon, and then we can start taking super chats from all you people. Our grift has got to keep going. Got to keep the grift going, baby. So, one way or another.
Don't forget, still collecting money for my advocacy organization. Going to be taking donations for the end of the year. Actually, I can check to tell you what we have currently. Currently, our goal is 12,000. We have raised just over $7,500. So we have 17 days left to meet our goal. So like I said, if you're able to give, to help me out and help my advocacy group out, especially for me, because I might have a bigger role in it in the new year. So stay tuned for that. It definitely will help us out. So if you're able to give, it's a hard time of year. It's Christmas, Hanukkah is a couple of days, so, money is tight, but whatever you're able to give, please give. And you have until the end of the year to do it. So thank you in advance. And yeah, as Shimon said, yes, we need to get that 1K. So you guys have been awesome, especially the last month. We still need that energy, to get to that 1,000. So
share,
please
like, hit the bell, hit the sub button, check, make sure you're still subbed. All that fun stuff. But anyway, I think that's us for this evening. As always, boys and girls, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.
Have a good week.
We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.